marriage or relationship is going to be perfect and peachy keen.
No, not none.
Maybe ours.
Let's be none. Yeah, ours.
Let's be honest. But here to tell us more about how to baby-proof your marriage, especially if it's maybe in a rocky state, is Dr. Paul Clark, who's the director of Mississauga Counseling. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Clark. So, I mean, this is a very interesting topic. We were talking about it last week, and so we're very excited to have you on. But, I mean, what happens when you bring a child into a rocky relationship?
Well, it makes it more complicated, actually. Having a child in a new relationship is always a complicating factor. In fact, most couples find that of all of the couples, about 60% of couples find their relationship deteriorates after they have a child. So having a child in a rocky relationship can often make it a lot rockier. And the irony is that a lot of couples will say, you know, well, let's have a baby, it'll bring us closer together.
Yes, I've heard that.
And it rarely works out that way because the baby adds, you know, a tremendous amount of more work and responsibility and the possibility for misunderstanding. So it's not really advisable. If you're having a rocky relationship and considering having a child, I would strongly advise against it. Really, you should be totally stable and very confident in your relationship before you start.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, but I mean, there's preconceived notion is out there. Why do you think people think this way?
Well, you know, it's like a baby represents love and, you know, the family. There's a lot of image of the happy family and, you know, oh, you know, it'll give us something to love and it'll distract from the problems that we're having together because we can both concentrate on loving our child. But those things don't go away after you have a child. You still have to get along together. In fact, you have to get along better because there are, you know, particularly if you're both working, essentially you have 2 full-time jobs. Add a baby, you've now got 3 full-time jobs going, so you have less time to solve the problems that you had before. You have the same disagreements, plus you have to add in all the disagreements you're going to have about parenting and how the baby should be raised and where the baby's going to sleep. And so generally it works the opposite way, and it's really sad actually because now you've got a baby in the situation, and if that relationship does have trouble or break up, now you've got all those. You know.
So yeah, let's talk about the baby. I mean, how detrimental can it be for the child itself?
Oh, it can be huge, depending on how the couple's able to handle their disagreements, but lots and lots of couples get into fighting, you know, in front of the child. I've been in counseling sessions with couples that bring in their child, and you know they're screaming back and forth at each other. You know, they can't get a babysitter or whatever, and they're yelling, and one of them will go, you know, if we break up, think of poor David. What's going to happen to David? And I'm thinking, you know, these people have missed the point that that you know if you're going to break up, that might affect the child, but the fighting, the constant bickering, because children are learning some very important words. Those early ages, you know, between infancy and about 10 years old, you're memorizing and hardwiring some very important words, and one of them is love. What is love? And, you know, my parents love me more than anybody else in the world, and my parents love each other. And so the role model that they're seeing is far more significant than anything that a breakup would probably, if it's a peaceful, amicable breakup, you know, that can really affect the child for the rest of his life because they learn that this is what a loving relationship is.
Sure. So let's reach out to maybe some of those couples that are watching today, or maybe one side of the couple who are in there, maybe not having, you know, the best relationship right now. It could definitely be improved. Maybe they're considering having a baby. What are some ways to sort of baby-proof, I guess, their marriage or their relationship?
Okay. So the first, I guess, most important thing is that you really talk it over. Before the baby comes, that you sit down and decide how you're going to manage this baby time. Because, again, one of the misconceptions is we get a crib, we get a baby bath, we get a car seat, we're good to go. You know, we'll get all the clothes. And that's not really, it's the time management and, you know, who's going to be taking on what responsibilities. Often it's the mother, you know, who starts taking on more and more responsibilities. When a baby arrives, generally, the mother instinctively goes into a sort of mother chip mode, and she becomes much more maternal and protective. The father often feels a tremendous responsibility for the child, which may, though, not put him helping in the home, but actually working harder at work, which takes him out of the home, which is not what is helpful to the... So understanding the communication again, that, you know, if you and your partner, even if you're getting along great before the baby gets there, after the baby arrives, you may have fundamental disagreements about, you know, how we can get all these things done.
So do you recommend maybe the couple sitting down and discussing who's going to do what's going to happen when, and who's going to take on which role?
It may sound strange, but before the baby gets there, one of the best things you can do is sit down and do exactly that. Like every single detail of, actually do every single detail of all the things that we currently do, all our current responsibilities, and then everything that's going to be involved in the baby. Who's going to wake up with the baby? Are we going to switch doing that? Who's going to change the baby? There's, you know, such that there are no questions, because otherwise there's going to be misunderstandings. There's going to be, you know, people just assume things, and very often, you know, going back to how my mother did it, or who didn't work, and, you know, oh, I thought you were going to handle all of this. And so the clearer you can be about the responsibilities that each of you has and that each of you is going to take care of, the less misunderstanding there's going to be later about. And that includes things like child rearing, and, you know, is the baby going to sleep in the bed? If they're going to sleep in the bed, how long are they going to sleep in the bed? Are they going to sleep just till 2 years old, or, you know, specific?
How are you able to sort of sit down with your partner and sort of go over these things? If you've never had a baby before, you don't even know how to broach some of these subjects. How do you sort of...
Well, that's a good question, and if you don't have see, again, an unstable relationship, you may not have the best communication to start off with. You may not even yet, you know, you just sort of get into the relationship and, well, you do this and I'll do that, and it's pretty simple, you know. You want to go to the movies? Let's go to the movies. Once a baby's there, you just can't go to the movies. Everything becomes a very complicated organizational process. I think it's like a military operation, right? You know, okay, you get the baby to the car and all the... But constant communication to understand that.
Communication is the key then, eh?
Oh, yeah. Lots of communication.
Well, we're going to be talking more about that when we come back. You're going to stick around?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So when we come back after this, Dr. Paul Clark will be joining us. We'll talk a little bit more about how to baby-proof your marriage, if maybe you're struggling with that. And also we're going to get to the roots of maybe some of those fights that are happening in your relationship as well. So lots to learn, lots to think about after the break right here on Daytime. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Daytime. Well, before the break, we were talking with Dr. Paul Clark about baby-proofing your marriage. Maybe you have a little bit of a rocky relationship with your partner, and bringing a baby into things might not be the best sort of thing to do. But we're going to break it down and go back to sort of square one in the basics of communication.
Yeah.
Thank you for sticking around.
Sure, yeah.
So let's talk about communication, how important that really is to a relationship, and to a relationship that's maybe a marriage, maybe a family.
Yeah. Well, the more communication that you can have, the better. Often, you know, once we get into a relationship, communication is not something we get a little bit complacent about, you know, going through our everyday activities.
Why? Why do you think we get like that?
Well, because, you know, lives get busy, and sort of, you know, we want to put out the first fire first, and life just keeps throwing things at us, and, you know, my boss says I've got to be there by 3, and, you know, people are constantly demanding, and the relationship is not actually demanding of you that, you know, you sit down and spend any time communicating. So you know, sometimes in some couples it happens pretty naturally, where they sit down and they find some time at the end of the day, or, you know, a couple times a week to sit down and go, look, you know, this is on my mind, I think we really need to talk about this, but often not. And so one of the recommendations is, like, if you're thinking about having a baby, that you, even before the baby arrives, have some counseling about, you know, how are you going to handle that? Just to open up some of those questions that you may not have asked. And actually, couples that do get counseling during the time that the new arrival of their baby tend to be much happier and much more successful in their relationship than the ones who just try and wing it. Again, yeah.
Well, I'd like to turn our attention to actually in-laws.
Oh, that could be a point of tension.
Right,
Yeah.
it actually can be. You can either get along with them very well, or actually bicker with them most instances. And how do you handle that? Excuse me.
Well, and so that's part of what you sit down and talk about. So that includes in the discussion, okay, you know, my mother, you know, she's going to be like this, and your mother, and so you decide, first of all, what are the priorities, who should get access, you know, they're going to want access, you're going to be, so there's not only how you are going to spend time with the child, but how the grandparents and extended family are, and if there is bickering, you know, if, you know, maybe you don't get along that well with so-and-so's in-laws or even with your own, the basic rule of thumb is that you are responsible for your family. So, you know, if I'm not getting along with your mother, that's your response. You know, if your mother is intruding onto this relationship, don't make that my responsibility to be the complainer all the time. You have to turn around and go, because very often what happens then is, now we get into, you start defending your family.
Right.
And so there are some priorities. You really have to put the marriage first, and that can be hard.
How do you create that united front, though?
Well, it can be really hard, especially there's some cultures where, like, this is not a question, where, you know, family is supposed to be involved in the life of the child, but still you have to, I mean, I strongly advise people to stand your ground and make your marriage and your, you know, your home marriage, your, this life the most important thing. Otherwise, because these are the people you're going to live with forever. Your family, yes, they're going to be around, but, you know, keeping your mother or your father happy in the short term is not worth, you know, something that's going to break up your marriage or make you so unhappy that you can't continue down the road. And that's something that I have to remind people a lot of the time, is that your happiness individually and together has got to be the biggest priority, because if you're not happy and healthy, then the child is going to sense that, and all of this other stuff is not going to matter. The fact that you're keeping your mother happy, we tend to, everybody wants something, right? You got to bring them over here. People are always asking us for things, so remember that, you know, your needs, now deciding what your needs are, because some I'll have couples and you know, they'll say, I'm sorry, but in my culture, you know, this is not negotiable. You know, my family has got to be involved. Sometimes they live in the house. Now, there's another one. You live in the house with your parents or your extended family. And now, how do you create space for you and your partner in the relationship?
How do you create space?
Well, very carefully. No, I mean, you have to set boundaries. If you're going to succeed, you have to set boundaries, and you have to be able to tell your parents, however difficult it is, you know what? You know, you got to use a word that a lot of people don't like using, and that's no, right? Like, I'm sorry.
To your in-laws?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Hey, you know, okay, well, you don't, maybe you say, you know, I'll think about it, right? If you can't actually use the no word, or, you know, and you make it as clear to them as possible. You know, they're not unreasonable, usually, if you sit down and say, look, this is, you know, we're struggling in our marriage, and, you know, that's the most important thing to us. So, you know, we'd love to have you come over on Tuesday night and Thursday night, but please tell us 24 hours in advance, or that you set ground rules for them.
So as important communication is between a couple, it's very important with in-laws as well. That's what you're saying.
Can be, yeah. Depending on the in-laws, it can be huge. And some work wonderfully, you know, like it's just the in-laws are very supportive, and, you know, they help you raising your child. Other times it's just, you know, we want baby time. We want to, you know, and so you're driving around, now complicating your life, getting over to the in-laws' house, getting them back, you know, oh, I've got to keep all these people happy, you know, and again, keeping other people happy has got to be secondary to keeping yourselves balanced.
Sure, a lot of compromises, it sounds like.
A lot of compromising.
Well, working together.
Yes, a lot to think about. I mean, when you're in a relationship with somebody, it might not just be between the two of you. There might be a third party involved.
There's a lot of people, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Indeed.
Yes, well, Dr. Clark, thank you so much for coming today. We've learned a lot from you, and thinking twice about my relationship right now. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm totally kidding. But hopefully compromise is key. For more information, you can visit http://bethechange.ca. There we go. It'll come up on the screen right afterwards as well. Thank you to all of our guests. We'll be back tomorrow with a new show. See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.